Hi, my name is Kathleen, and I'm the wife of an aortic dissection survivor. My husband's dissection happened on February 5th of 2019. We live in the Midwest, and thankfully, my husband works very near to one of the best academic medicine hospitals in the Midwest and likely in the country. So while he was at work, it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he was finishing up a class he was teaching, and he started to feel short of breath and sweaty and clammy, and he thought that he just wasn't feeling well. And so he sat down, and then he got up, and he sat down, and he got up, and he couldn't get comfortable. So at that point, the class was nearing over, and so he decided to dismiss the class, and he started to walk back to his office. As he was walking, his right leg became numb. And it started as sort of a slight numbing, and he just maybe thought, he had sat on it wrong or something like that. And as he continued to walk, he arrived at his office, and again, he sat down and tried to get comfortable, and he got up and couldn't get comfortable, and he walked to his office door, and then at that point, his leg was completely numb, and he fell down. And as he fell, he called for a colleague of his who was right next door in his classroom, and that colleague, as I understand it, some of the details are a little bit hazy, called for help. At that point, the school called 911, and the paramedics arrived as quickly as they could, of course. But because my husband had had a very busy day, he had not had a lot of water to drink, and he had 1 cup of coffee. And so, as I understand it, because again, I wasn't there, but this is how it was reported to me, he was dehydrated, and the paramedics had a very difficult time finding a vein to get him whatever he needed, and they were having a hard time with his blood pressure, and they were having a hard time getting a pulse. So finally, after some time, the paramedics were able to get him into the van, and they started on their way to the hospital. So from my perspective, so that's his perspective. From my perspective, my story is the following. It was a Tuesday afternoon in February. We live in a cold weather climate, but it was an absolutely gorgeous day. It was sunny, and I couldn't believe that it was February, and it just seemed really, really pretty. And it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, like I said before, and that's when I pick up our children from school. So I was in the pickup line, the kids got into the car, and I carpool with somebody else, so her kids got into the car as well. And as I was driving along, my phone rang, and it was my neighbor. And my neighbor and I are very good friends, but we either talk in person or we text message. We never call each other. So I saw it come up on my Bluetooth, and I happened to be at a stoplight, so I took the phone off of Bluetooth because I had this feeling that something was not right. So I picked up the phone, and my neighbor said, "Kathleen, something's going on with Shannon at work." And the reason that she knew is because her brother works with my husband, and her brother had called her to tell her what was going on. And I said, okay. And I don't really recall what I was feeling other than like, is this bad? Is this good? And my neighbor really couldn't tell me anything more than the paramedics had been called to the school and they were going to be taking him to our academic medical center, which I felt very relieved about. So I continued on my way, and at the end of that conversation, my neighbor said that the principal of the school would be calling me shortly to fill me in and let me know what to do. So I continued on my way, and all these thoughts were going through my head. I don't really know how to conceptualize it. And I arrived at my friend's driveway, and I opened up the doors to the minivan, and the kids started to get out, and she looked at me and she said, "What's going on?" And I said, "I've got to go." And she said, "I will take care of the kids. Don't worry about it." So I took off, and I started on my way to the hospital, which is about 45 minutes from here. And it also just happened to be the beginning of rush hour. So I knew that it was going to take me about an hour to get to the hospital. And as I was driving, I decided that I needed to call the principal because nobody was calling me. And I was in a little bit of a panic because I just had this feeling that Shannon had had a heart attack. I don't know why, probably because my own life experience dictates that that's what would happen. My own father died of a heart attack when he was 53. My husband is now 48. And I felt like maybe this is it. And I continued on my way to the hospital, called the principal, and he responded immediately and told me that Shannon was on his way to the hospital. And I said, okay, I will be at the ER. So after about an hour of driving, I finally showed up at the ER, and my husband had already been taken in for a CAT scan. He had been there at the hospital, I think about half an hour, maybe 20 minutes. And he was already in the CAT scan. And so they sat me down in the room where he was going to be coming back to, and they told me that, they were trying to figure out what was going on. And within about 5 minutes of me sitting there, he was rolled back into the room, and the ER doctor, who is amazing, said, we are dealing with an aortic dissection. And I said, I don't even know what that is. I have never heard of that. And she said, it's a very serious condition. It's life-threatening, and we have to get him on the OR table as soon as we possibly can. Okay. So they got Shannon all set up with IVs and all sorts of different needles in his arms. And within 5 minutes of her telling me that it was an aortic dissection, he was off to the OR. As they rolled him away, we looked at each other, and he said, tell the kids I love them and I love you. And he looked at me again and said, we've planned for this. We both understood that this was an incredibly serious situation, and I still at that point did not realize how serious it was. I, as I said, have experience with heart attack. My dad did have one heart attack prior to the MI that ultimately killed him, and that heart attack was relatively mild. They did an angioplasty, and it seemed fine. So I thought, well, maybe this is not that big of a deal. And I refused to look on the internet, and I didn't want to ask anybody at the hospital because I really did not want to know how serious it was. I just wasn't in a place for that. So they wheeled him off to the ER, and they told me to go to the lobby and wait, that a social worker would come and talk to me and tell me where to go to wait for my husband. And I looked at one of the vascular surgeons, and I said, how long is this surgery going to take? And he said anywhere between 8 and 10 hours. And I think even at that point, I still didn't understand how serious this was. So I went out to the lobby of the ER, and the social worker eventually came to tell me where to go to get my car and to park my car. And I went around to the main entrance of the hospital, parked the car, went in to what they call the family center. And that is where I waited for 10 hours or so for my husband to come out of surgery. Thankfully, I am very blessed to have a wonderful circle of friends, both from childhood and mom friends that I've recently met. And 2 of my mom friends came to stay with me in the family center overnight while we waited for my husband to get out of the OR. I have to say that the family center at our hospital is absolutely incredible. The people there that were working there were incredibly kind. They kept me in the loop constantly. They gave me a beeper so that if I wanted to go down to the cafeteria and get some food, I could do that. If I wanted to walk around the hospital to get some exercise, I could do that. So I went down to the cafeteria, got a little something to eat, and they beeped me. I went back up, and they said that, okay, your husband's doing well. They started the surgery about an hour ago. He's doing really well. Everything is going fine. And they continue to update me every couple hours. Around midnight, they had given me a little private room to go into, and I was in there with my friends. And the receptionist working the front desk at the family center gave me another update saying that the surgery was going well, that he was very strong. My husband was being very strong on the table, that things were looking really positive. And at 2:30, I got a knock on the little room door that I was staying in, and it was the surgeon. And he told me that my husband had done a great job on the table. He was coming off the surgery very strong. His heart was very strong. It looked good. But that this was a very serious condition. He had an ascending tear in his arch, and it went all the way down his aorta to his kidneys. The surgeon at that point wasn't sure if his kidneys would be compromised. We just didn't know. He said that he had fixed the dissection and that my husband, as far as the dissection was going, that everything looked good, but they weren't sure what the consequences of having had the dissection would be on the rest of his body. So After 2 more hours of waiting, once the surgeon left, the ICU called me in my little room and had me come upstairs with my friends. And my husband was in the ICU, what they called the cardiothoracic ICU. He was on a breathing tube, of course, and it was very difficult to see. But he was awake and he was aware and he knew that we were there. And eventually they took him off the tube. About an hour after that, they took him off the tube and he was able to talk a tiny little bit. From there, it was a long 7 days in the hospital. He spent another day and a half in the ICU, and then he spent another 6 days in what they call the cardiac step-down unit. And the prognosis within a couple days about his kidneys was very, very good. His kidneys, thankfully, at this point, are not damaged. Everything is going fine and continues to be fine today. We were concerned about the numbness in his leg, but the doctors and nurses were able to feel pulses in his feet, so they knew that the numbness was going to be a temporary situation, and thankfully it has been a temporary situation. So today we are about 7.5 weeks, maybe 8 weeks, I guess 8 weeks out from his surgery, and he is doing cardiac rehab 3 days a week. He feels much better. He feels much stronger, and we are incredibly blessed to have my husband, my children's father, with us. He's getting home from rehab right now. It has been an incredible journey for us, and I am so thankful to have the connections I made at Aortic Hope. I am thankful for our hospital, and I am thankful to the good Lord above, because we are here, we are learning, we are making progress, and our journey together has begun again. Thanks.